Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about how to create messages in Q2. This is in continuation with my previous video. So if you have not seen the part 1, you could directly go on to part 1 and see what exactly is Azure Storage Queues and where they are used. In this video, we'll actually practically see how we could create a message within the Q2, and then we'll in the subsequent video see how we could actually process those messages. Now, in order to create a message, we can create messages through the Azure Storage Queue Nugget package. So we are going to use a Nugget package within C# library, and we could send messages in two formats. One is just like a simple text message, which is just like anything, text message or hello or anything. And the second would be, which is more likely an appropriate message for the real world scenarios, is a .NET class objects, because you might want to send some kind of a message which you want to process, which carries some data, which carries some data notations or anything. So that's what we'll be actually sending it. So if you see the text message, simple text message is just like a simple text message that actually gets pushed into the storage queue, and you can have a .NET custom class. For example, I have a department class where you have two properties, a department number and a D name, which you could also create a message and put it into the queue. Now, these kind of messages are more important because they carry some kind of a data which would further be needed for processing. Let's say might be storing it in a database or somewhere else. So that's how the messages would be created. And let's now practically see how we could actually use the Nugget package within the C# environment or Visual Studio, and then we'll be able to create those messages in the Azure Storage Queue service. So friends, in order to work with the Azure Storage Queue in C# or Visual Studio, we have to actually do a couple of tasks beforehand. We'll need those services out here. I'm going to actually demonstrate this through a console app. So if you see, this is just like a console app or .NET 6 framework. You could use .NET 7 or 3.1 or whatever you are targeting. And the very first thing which you are going to use here is you would actually go on to the Azure storage account. In the previous video I did mention about that. So first of the things what you need here is, if you go on to the access keys, and then within the access keys you have like two keys, keys 1 and key 2, and there is a connection string out here. So if you could just use that, show, and then you could copy that. Now once you copy it, let's try putting this over here, which is, let's say, or connection string. Now that's the connection string which we are going to use. So I'm just going to copy that and let's say paste it over here, which makes sense, and then it gets pasted. Now this connection string, we are not using it for the Azure Storage Queue, rather the storage account in which it is there. So if you see, I'm using the storage account and then getting it from the access keys, this particular connection string. Now, because a storage account can have multiple queues or Azure Storage Queues, so we'll go on to the queues, and this is the name of the queue which we are going to use, that is the RD queue what we created yesterday. So we are going to use this queue to actually push this stuff. So I'm gonna create another variable which is, let's say, a queue name, and I'll just pass on RDQ. I'm sorry, RDQ. So these are the two things which I did. So I copied the connection string, which is nothing but rather the connection string of the storage account, and secondly the queue name, which is the actual name of the queue we are going to target. Now these two things, they should not be hard coded directly into your environment. You should use certain kind of a configuration files or environment variables, but this is because for the purpose of demonstrations I'm just going with that. So I'm not actually putting it into a configuration or anything. Now fundamentally we need another third thing which we are going to do is to add the Nugget package. Now for the Nugget package, if you click right mouse button over here and you say manage Nugget packages, if you click on here and you go on to the browse and search for that, So you are going to search for azure.storage.queues. So that would be the one which we are going to use, azure.storage.queues. This is the one which we are going to use, the Nugget package out here, and I'm going to add the latest package into my project. So once I add it, this add all the references and necessary libraries by which I could actually collaborate with that and then could actually use it over here. So once the Nugget package is added, so let's try, I'm gonna create, for example, send message to storage queue. So that's what I'm gonna use over here, and I'm gonna pass, let's say, a string message onto this. Like I'll pass a message and it would actually send on to that. Now I'll be using a queue client which actually belongs to that. So if you just use that, and I'll see, so using Azure Storage.queues. Okay, so I'll create a client object and new of queue client, and then I'll pass on the actual connection string. So this is how the queue client is going to connect to that connection string. And then the second this parameter which I'm going to pass is, if you see, you have two connection string and a queue name. So I'm going to pass on the queue name which I've actually defined over there. So I'm connecting with a particular storage account and then passing on a queue name by which I'm gonna connect it, and then I can send that client.send message. So that's there, and I'll say message. Okay, the message which I'll pass on here, and that's what it is sent. And if I just want, I could just do that. Let's say console.writeLine, the message was sent to the Azure Storage Queue. Now if you see, this particular function is ready for us. So if we go back to the queues, and let's say we'll click on the queue. So right now there are no messages out here. If I'll just refresh this, taking a while. Okay, so there are no messages out here. Yes, in the previous video we did add a message directly, but now we are programmatically adding those messages to this queue. Now in order to call this message, so let's see, I'll just call that message. I'll say send message to Azure Storage Queue and I'll just pass on, let's say, test message 1, and let's say send message to, I'll just copy that and paste it out here, and then I'll send a second message, and then I'll say test message 2. Now that's how I'll pass on. And let's try running it and see whether the messages are actually, we are writing two messages, actually sending two messages to the queue. So let's see whether they are actually received in the queue or not. So once we run this, it actually processes that. There's a hello world, and it does. Yeah, so everything looks fine. So if we see the output, all looks good, everything is fine. Application output is here, and then the message is passed on. Now in order to verify that, let's go back and refresh it. So if you see, we have two messages out here. These are the message ID that's there, and then the text message is there. So we are able to write two messages out there, text message 1 and text message 2. That's fundamentally right. We wanted those two messages, and those messages have been written in this. Okay, now let's clear this queue and try to write another message, which is more likely a .NET message with kind of a like a class message, or some information in the form of a class or anything which we want to send to the queue. Now let's clear this and let's create another. So we'll say void, and before that, what we'll do is we'll add a new class, because we want a class out here. So we'll just say add new class, and then empty class. I'll just pass on, let's say its name is department. I'll create that. Now within department, I'm just gonna take two things. One is integer dpt number, and we'll just use get set. That's fine. I'll take another property, public string dname, and I'll say get set. So these are the two properties which I created, which looks fine. There is a mistake, we just need to correct it. Okay, now once it is done, so you have two properties out here. Oh, you don't need within this because that's a constructor, so I'm just gonna get it out. I don't need the constructor, which looks fine. Now I have two properties, that's perfectly fine, a department number and a dname. Okay, let's go back to program sys. Now here we are going to create another message. So let's say another function, send class object message to or we can just name it like this, and we'll call it, let's say we want to create that. So the first thing we are going to create is I'm going to create let's say or we'll just pass on the complete object out here. So let's say we'll just say dpt, and we'll say dpt out here. We'll just use this, get its reference. We'll use, yep, that's the reference we need, and we'll just use, now because we have to pass that, so I'll be just using similar kind of a concept. So I'm gonna copy it there, paste it around here, so you get the connection string with the help of that. But now because that department is in the form of a class object, we need to kind of serialize that object. Serialization means to convert it into a proper serialized object that could be stored somewhere, and we could deserialize with its properties. That's another one, the opposite one. So what I'm gonna do over here is send message. So I'll say JSON convert dot serialize, and I'll just pass on an object which is department. That's what I'll receive. Now this JSON dot convert is more likely, I just need to make sure that this actually gets, I think so it is in the, so we'll just use using Newton soft dot JSON. So we'll use that. Okay, let's add a package for a nugget package. So we'll say Newton okay dot JSON, which is fine. I'll add that package, and once it gets added, okay, so now we could use that. So send message, so JSON dot serialize object, I'll pass on an object which I'll receive it, and I serialize it, and I actually send it, and then the message was sent to the Azure Storage Queue. Now you could actually kind of read line to just make sure that's actually kind of waiting for you. So now that's what the stuff which we need to do. Now in order to send this, I'm just gonna comment these two, and then I'll just add this. Let's say I'll create two objects. So d1 is equal to new of dpt, and I'll say department number is equal to 10, and dname is equal to, let's say, technology. That's another one, and I'll say dpt d2 is equal to dpt, and the another one which I'm gonna create is let's say 20. Dname is equal to, let's say, it's sales department. So I've got two objects. Okay, now I just need to call this function so that I can send that and paste it over here. So we'll just pass on d1 and then paste it over here, and we'll just pass on d2. Okay, which makes sense. So both the objects are passed. And now before running this, so let's just refresh this. The queue is empty, no messages out here. So let's see how we could actually use this .NET class object, which is a kind of some information which we want to pass on to the queue and store it as a message out there. Okay, so let's try running this. Once we run this, okay, hello world, the message was sent to the Azure Storage Queue, and okay, so it is actually reading line. So I'll just press enter. So the message was sent to the storage queue also because it was reading line. Okay, so I'll press enter. Boom, it is done. So both the messages should be there. So if you just go back, refresh that. So if you see Now both the messages are there with a message ID and the message text, but if you see, the message text is in the form of an object, kind of a JSON notation, where you have a key value pair, department number 10, dname technology, department number 20, dname sales. So this is how, friends, you could actually use the .NET C# library or a .NET framework to actually interact with storage queues programmatically. The fundamental is you need to have a connection string for the Azure storage account, and then you just need to have a queue name. So once you have, you could send simple messages, or you could even send messages which are based upon .NET class objects. So you could serialize this, send those messages, and they are stored there, which you could further use for processing. So I hope, guys, this video is gonna help you out in actually making sure how you could interact with your Azure storage queues through programmatically with C# and .NET framework. I'll be coming up with the next video to actually see how you could see those messages, or even read those messages, or receive those messages in my next video. So stay tuned and stay safe. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe it, and wish you all the best. Thank you.